Hello and welcome to Island Time. I'm your host Zoyal and I'm joined here with...
Bulbulaka, it's Mason on Island Time. Hope you're listening in. Hope you're fine.
Okay, so Island Time is a new podcast we're doing here at Radio Pasifik. It's a show all about island art, island artists, and basically everything that Fiji has to offer in terms of art.
And the Pacific has to offer in terms of art. So Micronesia, Polynesia, Melanesian art. So we have here today our guest, Mr. Larry Thomas. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, so our guest today is a very distinguished, world-weary playwright, director, and filmmaker who has brought to life over 12 plays in his lifetime. He's the director of the Oceania Centre here at the USP campus at Lodala. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well, Zoyal. Thank you.
I want to start off by saying The Accident, your most recent play. I heard that you were doing a panel discussion or a panel reading for it at the Fringe Festival. How is that going?
Okay, thank you. It's a dramatized reading of the play. When I was approached to perform the play, I mentioned that given the limited time, it would not be possible to produce the play in its entirety as we did last year. So a suggestion that I made was to have a dramatized reading, essentially with the same actors, but they would just be reading from the scripts, and there'd be lecterns. And our last performance was last night.
Oh.
And this was at the Fringe Festival?
It was a Fringe Festival in Sub Hall B, by the Dome. At the Dome.
So are we still doing it, or was it the last?
That was the last.
Oh, okay.
We had the performance on Saturday, then Monday, and yesterday, Tuesday.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Actually, the Fringe Festival has actually been really great for up-and-coming artists. Here at Radio Pasifik as well, most of our crew actually joined up for the Poetry Slam, which was really successful.
Yeah, and most of us are joining for the open mic tonight, which we're excited about.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Events like this, I feel are very, very helpful in order to bring out grassroots artists from all over. Because coming back to the Poetry Slam, the one that we took part in, 2 people from here who had never done poetry before in their life actually ended up coming in at first and second place.
Yeah. Oh, very good.
It was really cool
to
see.
There was about 4 of us that took part, and it was quite an amazing experience.
So you took part too?
I took part too. I performed 2 poems. One was on the oldest profession in the world, and one was on the government, the old government. Yeah.
Okay, and that was the first time you took part?
I did write poetry back in high school.
Okay.
But it was the first time for me to perform poetry at the Poetry Slam.
And how was that in front of a crowd?
It was interesting, kind of, because just to get your emotions out on the poem, and then you can understand poetry a bit more. Because when you read poetry back in high school, it's just a piece of paper.
Right.
But then when we were mentored on how to write our poems by the people here, it's kind of interesting how we put our emotions and just say what we want to say, and you can hear it when you say it.
Having to read between the lines in a poem actually brings out a lot. We don't understand. At times, they just feel like words and stanzas. But when you read between the lines, going back and reading high school poems now, it feels like a completely different thing. That I was like, I didn't read this. I read something completely different.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
And you're both taking part in the open mic?
I'll be taking part. I'll be reading another poem. Yeah.
Excellent.
Unfortunately, I didn't have time. I was I was getting ready for this, so I didn't have much time to prepare.
You're just too scared, Zoya. You're just too scared.
Well, I've always kind of been weary about that, self-conscious and stuff. Okay, so speaking about the Fringe Festival, events such as this, for example, the Rorama Art Festival that we had last year, that Oceania Centre actually helped a lot in. That was organized, and I actually went to some of the exhibitions, and it was so interesting looking at all of the great paintings that all these great artists had made, and some visual art as well at the film festival. That incredible short film called Solimbula, I think, from Tumeli Tungota, that was amazing. It was less than, I think, 7 minutes, but it was amazing how much emotion he was able to convey. So do you think that these events, do you think they have more of a, could they have more of an outreach, bring in more artists over time from a village, say in the very remote areas of a highland somewhere? Do you think we can bring them eventually if we do more of these over time?
Absolutely. There is so much potential There are many talented and skilled people out there, but like any talent, you have to work on that talent. People say, well, you're just born with it. Yes, you may be born with it, but like any skill, you have to work at it to grow it and just to be better at that particular talent. And so there is much talent around. But unfortunately, we are not given the encouragement or the support and the encouragement, particularly for poets, for literature, writing stories, writing scripts, making films, and certain individuals like Meli Tungota and the other guy who made the Bean Peanut. Dan Veitata.
Dan Veitata, yes.
These are really talented young people, but they need encouragement, they need support to excuse me, to further their knowledge and further their skills. And so yes, we can bring in people from anywhere, but you have to be a bit more focused on what you want to do. There is a danger here of just accepting things and say it's fantastic when actually it's not fantastic. It's pretty bad. But we want to encourage people.
I think one thing that stems from it is that we do have a lot of people that want to do that do want to tell stories, because we come from a region where for thousands of years it was done through songs, it was done through dances, it was done through tapa, And I think what you said is very true, is that we just need that push. Because I was very, like I said, I wrote poetry back in high school, but I had no platform to say it. Or in others, I know most of my friends wrote poetry or wrote songs back in high school, and they never had a continuous platform for them to go on it. They just always kept it to themselves, because they were kind of shy, or scared. What if this is funny to somebody else? What if someone doesn't agree with the story that I'm trying to tell? But it's good to have that view that you just mentioned.
Well, we come from an oral tradition.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's Fiji and the rest of the Pacific, where stories are told and handed down from one generation to another.
Yeah.
And it's only recent that we've begun to write and document. But much of it still is undocumented. And this is the skill. You have orators. Samoa. You have these very skilled orators, and that is a skilled, and it's not everybody. Here in Fiji, when you have a traditional presentation, yes, most people can do the presentation, but you can distinguish those who have that inherent skill, and it's beautiful to listen to, because everything they say is thought of, and they make the connections to lineage, to the land, and this is important. So the oral tradition, we come from that.
Do you think that having to dedicate yourself that much to an art, to practice every day, to try to make yourself better, to try to make yourself one of the best to do a particular thing, do you think that is one of the things that sort of pulls artists back? Because they're like, if I dedicate myself fully to this art form, it leaves me like no other choice than to succeed at that art form. But if I don't, that's it for me. I have to find like work somewhere else. Like for me, for example, I love writing. Writing is just one of my favorite things of all time. I find myself writing for hours and hours on end, because it's endless, the imagination that you can bring up. You'll just have strokes of inspiration come out of nowhere. But it's like I can't think of it as a viable career path. That's why I'm doing CS and journalism, because I feel like they're much more stable career paths that people can follow. But do you think that that's like one of the things that holds people back, the need to have to train every day?
Absolutely. People need to earn a living, to pay the bills.
Yes.
And, if you tell your parents, well, I'm going to be a writer, they'll say, okay, fine, but get a real job. Because writing is not seen as a real job. And I've worked with artists who are painters, who have struggled. The artists, the senior artists who are established today, they've come a long way because their family said, what is it you're painting? We need the bills to be paid.
Yes.
Exactly.
This is not a real job. So art, or the creative arts, often seen as not real jobs. But they are real jobs. They actually contribute to the economy of any country. So you talk about the creative industries, and you look at dance. I mean, dance, the dance form in hotels,
Yes.
in shows.
Yeah.
They're always in demand.
Especially for a country like Fiji, where tourism is like such a big
everywhere
thing.
actually. You know, you go to Pacific Island countries, to Tonga, to Samoa, to Solomon, Vanuatu. You know, at the hotels they bring in these people, but you see, they're just seen as entertainment. And when COVID happened, then these countries realized, and the artists themselves, that they've lost their job. This was the job that sustained them, albeit entertaining. But it was an important aspect to the hotel's program to have entertainment. Tourists want to come and see something original, something local, and they're usually always very good. And you know, here in the hotels, we have these dancers, these performers coming in. Now we have contemporary dancers like Vo, like the Oceania dance, and many others. And so, unless we change and the system, and I'm talking about the education system, changes its attitude towards the creative arts, we're not going to really progress. And I think this is where the curriculum needs to incorporate that right from the very first year of school.
Talking about that, talking about like the curriculum and trying to incorporate as much art. I believe Film in Fiji, was it last year when they did the Fiji International Film Festival? They actually launched a curriculum, didn't they? Where 11 schools, I think, around Fiji took part in a filmmaking course or something. Of that nature.
Filmmaking,
Well, it's Film Fiji. Film Fiji, which I think is a really good initiative. But you see, many years ago, at the time it was the Fiji Audiovisual Commission, which is now called Film Fiji. They were involved in the Kula Film Festival. And so they worked with high schools around the country. To make short films, and I was very much involved in that in those early years. And so again, the potential is there, and I know a number of young people who were inspired by that initiative, that they wanted to make film and be filmmakers and writers, and FNU came in. But I know the FNU program hasn't been really consistent. I think it's a great initiative, but it hasn't been consistent. And so it's like a start-stop area for those who are interested in filmmaking.
There isn't really like a sort of continuous push to try to get filmmaking into the zeitgeist of Fijian culture.
I think one thing we can stem from understanding, or when people in the Pacific, especially people in your line of work in Fiji, when they want to do anything about art, it really stems from the passion. Because if you go overseas and they do art, they get paid for it. They get paid a lot for it. So I think one thing we can really appreciate is that if you do move into the industry of art in Fiji, it's just for the passion.
Well, absolutely. It's like anything. You have a calling. Because you have the real artists, and you have artists who just do it because it's a job. And so the real artists do it because they have a passion. They just feel, this is what I want, this is what I like, and whether it pays me or not, I'm going to still do it. And there are real artists around. Fortunately, a few of them have been able to make a living, albeit still struggling. If to come back to what you were saying earlier on, Zoyal, if I decided at the very outset when I started writing and being involved in theatre, this is not a real job, it's not going to pay me, I would have stopped. But I didn't stop because I had the passion. I had the passion to be involved. And, many times you pay your own bus fare, you go, there's a lot of waiting, sometimes unrewarding, but there is something about it that drives you, or drove me. And so, fortunately, I was able to get a job. And, but ironically, the job that I got here at the University of the South Pacific many years ago was the result of my work in the creative area, in theatre and in writing. And it's segued into literature. My training was actually in media, media and communications, and film. And in some ways, I've come full circle now because now I'm involved in that. But I came to it in a very roundabout way. And so to your question earlier on about people, yes, and what Mason is saying, it's you have to have the passion.
Yeah.
If you have the passion, and some are unafraid, afraid to take that step. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but if you just believe in it, you have to have the courage.
Yes.
You have to have the courage to say, okay, this may not feed me at the moment or feed my family. You have to make the choice. Sometimes it's a tough choice.
Yeah.
Sometimes your family needs you to go and work. But if you're, and I know a lot of artists, they do other jobs in order to feed their passion, which is their work. But it's not impossible. But one needs to have the courage to say, I'm going to do it. And you'll be surprised at what comes. Because I think now more than ever, there is an appreciation of art. We have a growing creative industry. And a number of people have been involved in developing that industry, working behind the scenes, working with government. But government needs to also change their thinking around this.
I think we just need like a big Peter Jackson moment. Someone.
Well, that Peter Jackson worked very hard to get to where he was.
Exactly.
At that point.
He worked for years at ILM. Eventually, he got a chance to make Lord of the Rings, and he decided, I'm going to make it in New Zealand, and it's going to make New Zealand one of the biggest filmmaking countries in the world. And now we have like so many movies being made. I think 2 years ago, I think it was called Power of the Dog. It was actually supposed to be in the west of America, but it was shot all in New Zealand. And it's amazing. Like things.
Well, while I think about it, and it just a slight digression, Film Fiji are offering. You saw that.
And
it's really good for script writing,
script development and producer.
Someone go sign up for it.
Do that. Because see, this is an opportunity that Film Fiji is offering, and I think it was support of the European Union and SPC to do this. So this is, these opportunities don't come all the time to offer this free of charge over a series of months, and at the end of it, you will have learned so much from the industry experts.
Seeing the engagement on the post that Film Fiji made, it was amazing. I think it had like over 1,000 likes at some point when I saw it. So the engagement and like the love and like the appreciation for it is really there, and I think people are really signing up for it. And I hope it turns out to be a very successful program.
I'm sure it will be.
It was very clear on what the objective of that. Of what it was. I was reading it and I was writing it. I was signing up, and then I forgot something and I just left it. I was like, okay, today I'm going to do it. I'm going to save it for later, just before it closes at 5 o'clock. So
not today. It's closing next week.
It's closing next week.
8th.
Oh, okay.
8th of
I thought it was
March.
closing.
That's why I'm chilling. That's why I'm like polishing up the script and everything.
But good. I really encourage you guys to do that.
Yeah, because I've had a passion to do like mini documentary series since high school. But I think the only problem that I had was the resources to actually start it.
Yes.
So back in high school, when I took history, I took geography. Doing history, we had a lot of passion to like tell stories of like the Maris brothers and like where they came from and the history of our school and then other things. But then I think the only thing that stopped me from actually moving forward was the lack of resources. So basically a camera, maybe the knowledge of how to write a script. A lot of people, this is one fault that a lot of the younger generations are coming through now with. What do you think companies can do? NGOs, the European Union probably, the government probably, or Film Fiji. What do you think they could do apart from like the Kula Film Festival to combat that problem?
I come back to what I said earlier. They need to support the education system, so that these programs can be offered or integrated into the school curriculum. And I think you actually broaden the thinking of children and adults. When you study something that is just not maths, English, chemistry, biology, and social sciences, because this is thinking creatively. You're telling stories. How do you tell a story? How do you write a script? How do you hold a camera? How do you tell a story just visually.
Yeah.
You know, and you're actually forcing the children to think creatively, and you know, and we saw it with the cooler. It was amazing.
Yeah,
What they came up with.
Like watching students like from all over just make a movie on like their phone cameras and stuff. It was really interesting. But it really kind of sucked for like me. I come from an interior school in Nandronga, so they never really tried to do anything for the Kula Film Festival. I always pushed for it. I was like, let me just do it on my own. I'll do it on my own. I don't need anyone, like I don't need any help from like the school or anything. I'll do it. I'll shoot it on my phone. I'll take some friends and we'll do it and we'll submit it. They're like, no, focus on your studies. You know, exams are coming up, and they always give that excuse to just cut out all the extracurricular stuffs out of like I think we didn't have like an arts and craft class and a music class, anything of that sort. I think they even cut out like library classes at one point because they were like, just focus on that final exam. And I think a lot of it is motivated because of how like the standardized exam is structured. It's just like you have to pass that last exam, otherwise it doesn't really matter. You don't get
that's prevalent right across the country. You know, it's so restrictive, completely restrictive.
Yes.
You know, if you offer music, if you offer art, crafts, how to paint, how to draw, how to make pottery, working things with your hands.
Opens up your mind. It opens
absolutely.
Of doing other things.
And as you both know, there are many kids who are not academically oriented. And so you give them, you know, a clay, and you know, you'll be amazed at what they can produce.
Exactly.
Or a paintbrush, or a pen, just to write without judgment. So when you're writing, and I think the problem is that everything is judged, is whether it's right or wrong, good or bad, and as long as you continue to judge, then you know the child will not really progress.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, I think what I think the problem with our education system, it's telling us you only need maths, you only need English.
Yes.
One thing I really appreciated about the high school that I came from was that we focused on other areas. It was your character. It was when we had music classes, we actually learned how to play the ukulele. Everyone pitched in on how to learn the ukulele.
Ooh, Maris Brothers.
Where when it was art and craft time, we actually did little art and crafts here and there. We always had those boys wanting to go have PE when we had art and music classes, but I think it opened us up. Like people wanted to learn how to play the guitar, people wanted to learn how to paint, people wanted to learn all these other things, and it was quite interesting to see that they just wanted, apart from sports, they wanted to do all these things. So I'm just
that's some of the most fun like students have. Like you get given like that 1 hour maybe every day where it's just do something you want to do something creative. And I hated the teachers that did this. They always made the music teachers or like the PE teachers or whatever it was, whatever like special like different class it was, they'd always make the teacher a math or an English teacher. So what they do is they'd come inside the class, they'd be like, okay students, bring out your maths books, let's do maths.
Yes,
I hated that. I was like, oh my god, we get given 1 hour and you're taking that away from us.
But this is the thing, you see, these same teachers came through the system. So it keeps perpetuating itself.
And
so
it just keeps repeating.
That's right. And it's not really, you know, in defense of the teachers, it's really not their fault. Because they just, okay, I don't know anything else. I just know maths. Or I just know English.
Exactly.
You know, or I just know this. And you know, I taught very briefly at high school, and the one thing I wanted to do was to get them to be interested to teach English. So at the first day of class, I asked the students, well, who in this class likes English? Not a single hand went up. They all hated English. They hated poetry even more. You know, and it was because of the way it was taught. You know, and so when you change the way you want to teach it, but also for me, it was thinking when I was in where they're sitting now, how did I want it to be taught? And so I put myself in their position, and that's as a teacher, not only in high school but here at university, it's always trying to put myself from the point of view of the student, and it's not easy. You know, sometimes, of course, you just have to you got to try and maneuver your way through. And but it's once you try and understand the student understands that and respects it, and then I think there is the process of learning.
So we were talking about how artists and like the curriculum itself is not really suited to guide artists towards wanting to pursue this as a full-time career. So I want to talk about a little bit about your time as a teacher here at USP. So in those early days, was there like people like signing up for like film theory classes and history classes about film, like in those early days in literature? Was it like popular as back then as it is today, or was it very different?
It was quite different, mainly because we didn't have film then.
Yeah.
It was more theatre.
Theatre.
Theatre. So we had a theatre arts program at that time. What is now Space was called the School of Humanities.
Yeah.
And within the School of Humanities, you had literature and language. And so in literature and language, we have theatre arts. And myself and a colleague, Professor Ian Gaskell, were teaching theatre arts. So it was a minor program. And so there was definitely interest. And during those years, there was a lot happening. There was a lot of performance.
Yes.
We had the New Waves group who were reading, developing writing. There were many activities, happening on campus. And this was in the 90s and into the 2000s. And I think, gradually people left. People who drove those activities, drove those programs, they moved on. I also moved on. Ian Gaskell also moved on. And things just, died a slow death.
And was this around the same time when you started playwriting and directing?
No, I was writing and directing long before I joined the department. I actually started writing when I was a teenager from school. And when I was at Marist, we had a teacher, Mr. Bob Miles, who was an English teacher. And during that time, there used to be the English Teachers Association organized a school drama festival. And the drama festival was very popular. So all the high schools in Suva mainly were invited to participate. And so Marist participated. Mr. Miles got a group together. So when I got into high school, he called for auditions. And because in primary school I'd done a bit of, particularly the class 8, some activities, drama. When I came to high school and Bob was teaching English and for those of interested in drama, I auditioned. We had a play. I performed in the play, and subsequently every year we took part in the school's drama festival. And that's where my interest peaked. I just realized this is something I really enjoyed doing. It just came easily, it flowed well. And the passion. It was I was committed. I attended rehearsals. I never missed rehearsals. I was always there before everybody else. And it was fun. Above all, it was fun. It was working with different people, learning those lines, getting the blocking right, and so on and so forth. And then that segued into my involvement with the Fiji Arts Club. So I was, 19, 20 then. And I thought, okay, maybe I should write a play. So I lived in Rewanga, and as you know, Rewanga is a very famous area in Suva. And I was born and I grew up and lived most of my life in Rewanga. And that was, fed me many stories, and particularly in the area that I lived in. And it was an inspirational place, and continues to be an inspirational place to live. And so, one thing led to another. So I wrote my first play when I was living in Rewanga. Other plays also. When I was still living in Rewanga, I wrote a few other plays after that. But I wrote it, and then I thought it was so bad, I left it. I gave it to people to read, and they were very encouraging. Actually, it was really encouraging, and which was good. But still, I didn't have the confidence to say, okay, this is a great play. So it took 7 years later that I finally got the courage to direct it. And also it had a very large cast of 19, which is a big cast for a play. But I auditioned. I had auditions, and I had a great cast, and it was performed at the Fiji Arts Club in 1987.
Speaking about the Fiji Arts Club, are those kinds of organizations still around, or have them long?
Fiji Arts Club is still there. The Playhouse is still there, and for me the Playhouse was a theater where I honed my skills and learned much. Unfortunately, like I said earlier, people have moved on.
Yeah.
And the Fiji Arts Club is still there. It's there, but not really functioning. The Playhouse is there, and various arts activities are happening there.
Yeah, I've seen. I think it's mostly been taken over by dance groups.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah,
so it's still supporting the arts.
Yeah.
But we just don't have the people and the support needed to make things happen.
You believe a revival could happen in the next few years?
Yes.
Probably led by you to bring together artists from USP, from Fiji.
Anything is possible, Mason.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of effort and hard work.
Yeah.
I've been working in this industry for a long time, and I know it sounds wonderful. Let's do it.
Yeah.
When it comes to actually making it happen,
a lot of,
you don't get the same commitment.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Of course, if you're pouring money into it, then that's a different thing, because then you pay people to come.
Yeah.
You can pay for their bus fares.
Yeah.
A lot of these young people who want to come, they can't get $2 together.
Back
because
in
they
the
need bus fare.
sorry to cut you off, but you spoke about like pouring money into like the art form. Back in the day, were like the artists and everyone like paid, or was it just mostly out of like pure passion?
No one has paid a single cent. I paid for my own bus fare, and my meals on my own, and I had a job, but it wasn't, enough, paying enough, but I did it because I was passionate.
Yeah.
And when I was directing the plays, there were a number of people who didn't have bus fare, so I gave them bus fare. In order to get them to come. But we weren't paying anybody. And we still don't pay people. We give them an allowance. An allowance is like bus fare, sometimes it pays them a meal, but it's still not enough. And unless you remunerate them, you're not going to get the result that you want. Because they're worried about their bus fare, they're worried about food, they're worried about clothing and toiletries and stuff like that. So these things we often don't think about. And so any revival is possible, but it's a lot of work and effort.
A lot of work and effort. Okay, do you think that there not being like enough people who are interested like in doing it, and there's like not a commitment? Do you think that's because like people are like kind of hesitant of all the new ideas that are like coming in, and instead you probably want to give them like something familiar to like bring them in, get your claws in them, and then keep them, and then give them the original ideas when you get them in? Do you think something like that could happen? What I mean by that is you give them a play for something that they already know, perhaps a movie, an adaptation, a play, like an adaptation of a famous movie or something like that, and then you tell them, okay, you can come back next week and you can see an original play from us. You make it free, and then you have the next one be paid. Or is that kind of thing just like...
No. So just as an analogy, like high school.
Yeah.
From my own experience of high school. So we do a play, and when it comes to poetry and to drama, and particularly, teaching, I taught at Marist briefly, or any school. I mean, obviously the guys are always more, self-conscious, and than the female. Female students are always great, they just do it and do it really well. The guys tend to be a bit more hesitant. And so we had to do Julius Caesar, the play Julius Caesar. And Shakespeare's great, but you have to love Shakespeare. And while I didn't really love Shakespeare, I appreciated Shakespeare as an amazing playwright. It didn't really quite resonate with me. But I had to teach it, and I wanted to teach it well and to understand it. So I did a lot of reading. I read the play a number of times. I read commentaries on the play. But that was my own effort as a teacher. So that when I'm teaching it, I know what I'm teaching. Because the students will say, what's this all about? Because if you're going to be dense about it, then the student is not going to learn anything. So that's one thing. Now, you offer them that play. It's for the first time. They're going to read it. You want them to be interested, to take part. But it's not just sitting in front of the desk reading it. Okay, let's get up, move the desk aside. Let's perform this. Okay, we're going to do this particular scene. We're going to do where Caesar is stabbed. And so let's try this. And once they begin moving around, they get very interested. Okay, this is your character. How would you say this? But what is important, and my own way of teaching, is how do I relate it back to their own life? How do I relate it back to where they come from, to their own society. Because once you're able to relate that, to explain that, when they can relate to something that they're familiar with, it resonates.
Yeah.
And so if it doesn't resonate, they're struggling. And remember, you're looking at, young people who are interested, but it's trying to make the connections. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it works.
Yeah.
But one has to make the effort. And this is where the teacher's role is really important. But, not often not all the teachers have the time to do that. You have to be a particular teacher who's, again, passionate and interested about what you're teaching and your subject. So when you offer them something, you offer it for the first time, you want them to like it. Not to wait until, okay, we're going to, next week we're going to do something different, but the real stuff. It has to be the real stuff from the very beginning.
Okay. Yeah, and I understand. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you about like some of your inspirations, like some of the stuff that really got you into like famous poets, famous playwrights, famous plays, stuff like that. Stuff that really got you like interested into it. Like what are the inspirations that got you to like your heroes per se?
Thank you. So I was very fortunate that there was no television. There was no mobile. It was just radio. So I listened to the radio. Yeah. We all had radio. Everybody had a radio at home. And we had wonderful programs on the radio. We had serials on the radio. We had programs, interactive development programs, theater, on the radio. And I think twice a week, there was a children's story. So I always listened to the children's stories, eventually graduated to the serials for adults. And so I grew up in that era to say, of the radio. And I'm so grateful that I had that, and people of my generation appreciated that also. The mobile phone is great. The technology, we have evolved to the technology now, which is great. So when television came, we began watching programs from overseas. Yeah. So because the technology wasn't there then, I read a lot. Yeah. So, and when you come from a very poor background, living in Rwanda, reading is not encouraged. Yes. It's like get a real job. Why are you reading? You're lazy. So, get about and rake the yard or wipe the windows or something. But I had no storybooks. Yeah. And so I would just, grab whatever I could. And I read a lot. I read the Fiji Times a lot. When I went and there was in somebody's house, I would just read. I forced myself to read. And in school, of course, we had, primary school, books to read. So I just devoured literature. Be it the newspapers or storybooks. And then, of course, I began to evolve in my reading, read more adult books. I started, with Hardy Boys, those books. Yeah. And then eventually, one writer was Agatha Christie. Yeah, I loved Agatha Christie. So I think I've read almost all of Agatha Christie as well. I'm sure there's a lot more that I haven't read, but there's a lot. Yeah. And there was a group of two other friends. We do exchange books. They had books, so they exchanged it with me. And we just read. And then I just kept reading, other more serious books. Not that Agatha Christie wasn't serious, but you know what I mean. So if I didn't have that, then I certainly wouldn't be sitting here telling you all of this. Yeah. But it was reading. So reading is so important. And people say, I don't have time to read. I just don't accept that. Yeah. If you want to read or if you want to do anything, you make the time to read, And so for me, the two things that I couldn't do without in my life is reading and music. Yeah. Those two things are so important. And they've really helped me in my own development. But it's also given me a greater appreciation of the arts. Yeah. And so from reading, of course, with literature, I came to teach literature. And of course, segueing into theater. Yeah. So I began to read writers who inspired me. And when I was teaching literature, I said to I always tell the students, you have to read the Russians. You have to read the Russians because they're the greatest writers, really, the Russians, And so at the age of 18, I read Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. Yeah. This is a book that's 1,500 pages long. And I had pocket money, and I used that pocket money to buy the book. My mother said, why are you buying this book for? It's expensive. It was $9.95, but at the time it was very expensive. Yeah. I started the book and I couldn't put it down.
Yeah.
You know,
I get that sometimes.
but so yes, just so reading the Russians, and eventually I read other Russian writers, but also another African American writer is James Baldwin.
Yeah.
So James Baldwin, of course, just blew me away with his honesty. And the issues that he wrote about, particularly as an African American, and racism in the States then when he was growing up in the 50s and 60s and continues to this day.
Yeah.
But he was he cut through, excuse the word, the bullshit. And came straight to the point, and continues to inspire many writers, but also a commentary on American society in relation to race. And Tennessee Williams, another playwright, who, again, for me, was just an amazing playwright. And there are many other playwrights. So in writing plays, I also read other playwrights.
Yeah.
It is important to read other plays. The same thing, in writing short fiction, I read many great writers. So reading.
So talking about that, like you just mentioned, like that your art has a lot of where you come from, right? Your times as a young kid in Rwanda. You mentioned James Baldwin and his experiences being African American during that time. So all that seems to like suggest that art really does have a lot of the artist in it, right? So it's actually an interesting topic that I want to like get your opinion on, and that is AI art, artificial intelligence, creating art. I know like a lot of artists that I follow, they really, really hate it. They hate it with a passion, because of course you would. It's something like that completely goes against what you believe in. Yeah. So what do you think about artificial intelligence and art?
Well, the word that comes to mind is lazy.
Yeah.
It's lazy, and of course I don't like it or appreciate it,
of course,
because it's a lazy way of doing things. It's an amazing, I'm sure, in its own way, it does some amazing things. But for me, I share the opinions of many other artists and writers. It's like this. Is it a chap?
ChatGPT, I think it's called.
ChatGPT, yeah. So they can write for you.
Yeah.
It's scary.
It is.
Yeah,
it is very scary.
It's kind of scary. Yeah.
Because then why bother when a machine or a piece of technology can do things for you? So you might as well just stay at home, get them to write your book, get them to wash your dishes, get them to cook your food. What's the point of living?
Exactly. It just takes out all of like the love and like the attention to detail about everything. Like when I like to write about back home, like the sugarcane fields and how like you hear the noise of like the cracking of all the leaves as the cane is burning during October and stuff like that. So those things are really interesting. But when you let someone like a computer or an artificial intelligence write that same thing for you, they're just going to take everyone else's experience from the internet that they can find, put it together just to emulate an experience that you have personally, something that you've experienced that of course a lot of others have, but you've experienced it in your own way with your own unique perspective. And I feel like once you take like the artist out of the art, that just kills art altogether.
Absolutely. Well, nature is so integral in our life. In our lives, in everything, and you talk about the sugarcane, the sugarcane fields. I mean, they're amazing. The sugarcane fields, or other farms, or just walking through a park, or the ocean. These are so important in our life, in our health, in our peace of mind, in our wellness. If we take away nature, we take away a large part of living. And this is so important. And so when technology, in my view, completely cuts that element off. And so we look at our climate change, for example, that's happening now. That's drawing attention to what's happening in the world. And you have some climate deniers, climate change deniers. They'll always have people like that. But we've seen it. We've experienced it here in America right now. We're having all over the world adverse weather conditions. And so this is part of the evolution of our climate changing, albeit. So nature, for me, nature is a force to be reckoned with, but we have to, apart from respecting nature, we also have to love nature.
Okay, so just to round things off, you briefly mentioned Agatha Christie before you started. So I recently just watched both of the Knives Out movies, the Rian Johnson ones. He was really inspired by Agatha Christie in writing those novels. So I see those movies as kind of Agatha Christie adaptations, even though I know Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile are there. I don't really think they're as good because they're trying to do Agatha Christie as from the books.
But it's the new version.
Yeah.
There are two versions, old versions of Death on the Nile and Murder on the Orient Express, which I think are much better than the new versions.
The older ones are much better. I think there was one where an actress was playing a dual role. She was doing two roles at the same time. I feel like that one is the one that I want to watch next. It's on my watch list. But I want to talk about like film adaptations of books and stuff. Do you have any personal favorites that you like always go back to in terms of like watching films that you're like, oh, this is perfect. This is right from the book, like book to page. For me, it's Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey. Even though the author and the director, Stanley Kubrick, and Arthur C. Clarke both wrote the film and the script simultaneously, it deviates so much, yet it feels like they're part of the same universe. Do you have anything like that? Like that you often think of?
No, unfortunately. I mean, there are too many books that I've read that have been made into films, and they always are never true to the film. I mean, to the book. It always happens. And I've seen 2001: Space Odyssey. I've not read the book. I'm not a great fan of science fiction. I like science fiction. You know, watching the movies. I've read Day of the Triffids and. Another one,
Dune,
by the same writer.
Oh,
but I've read others. I'm not. Science fiction is not really. I respect the writers, of course. They're good. It just doesn't resonate with me.
Okay, so just before we go into the break, can you name your 5 favorite movies of all time?
Oh man, that's really hard. I think my number one is Cinema Paradiso.
Ooh. That's amazing. Okay.
It's an Italian film.
Yeah.
I've seen it a number of times. And I've also got the DVD of the director's cut.
Yeah.
The second film would be Moonstruck.
Ooh, yes.
And I don't know. There are so many good films. It was a Brazilian film that I saw many years ago called Pixote.
Ooh.
So it's Pixote, and it's about a group of street kids in Sao Paulo in Brazil. So Pixote for me was an amazing film. It was very raw, looking at life of these kids on the streets and their survival.
Wait, is Pixote the Brazilian name for City of God?
No.
Wait, City of God is a different film.
Yeah. City of God was made more recently.
Yeah, I think it was made in 2002.
Yeah, I think it's called Pixote, but I may have got the pronunciation wrong. There was another film called Sugarcane Alley.
Yeah.
It was a female filmmaker from one of the Caribbean countries. I've forgotten what it's called. So that one, and I think it's got to be Spike Lee.
Ooh. Do the Right Thing.
Do the Right Thing.
Yeah.
Do the Right Thing. Yeah. But I enjoy Spike Lee's film, all of his films, and they're good.
I think we should bring the conversation back to your play, The Accident. It's the most recent one that you've done. You recently did a dramatized reading of it at the Fringe Festival. So it'd be great if you could like talk a little bit about what the play's about and like what are like some of your experiences that led you to make this play.
I think the play grew out of what's happened in Fiji post 2006.
Yeah,
it's hard to try and condense a story that encompasses many years, but it's really a story of identity, of ethnicity, of culture, of memories and remembering.
Yeah.
when 1987, the coup of 1987 happened, it was more than a shock. It was really more a shock. It was traumatic.
Exactly.
It was really traumatic, And I remember it very, very distinctly. All the coups I was here. I remember 1987, then 2000, 2006.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that the current coalition government is talking about truth and reconciliation.
Yeah.
And so I chair an NGO here, peace building. So myself and a few other colleagues took a trip to South Africa.
Yeah.
To visit post Truth and Reconciliation Commission there in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. And we talked to a number of organizations and people who are involved in the process of truth and reconciliation.
Yeah.
It's an amazing process.
Yeah.
Truth and reconciliation is good.
It feels like...
But you have to do it properly.
Yeah.
You can't just pay lip service to a process and not mean it.
Yeah.
And so, because if the very people who want to do the truth and reconciliation, then they have to also be able to accept the consequences of the outcome of that process. And so for me, it was, this is a country that I belong to, a country that I love, and a country that I would never abandon.
Yeah.
In spite of all what has happened. Writing has allowed me to talk about the story of this country, more contemporary. The thing that has always interested me are relationships. Relationships, not only relationships of individuals, but relationships of men and women, relationships of ethnicities, of the different cultures that interact and call this place home. And so for me, the accident, I knew I wanted to write something that now is the accident, but how do I begin to write that story? And it all began with a car accident. And so I used to be horrified when I read in the papers that people who accidentally killed people on the road didn't really pay the penalty. I mean, they were either suspended sentences or a fine. And I said, so you've accidentally killed someone. It wasn't your intention. But why were you drinking? And then, of course, you, as often the case is, you defend yourself and say, well, I didn't mean to do it. It was not my fault. But you've killed someone. You've killed a man or a woman dear to a family. The sole breadwinner of a family, so it's okay for you to, but it's not okay for the family. They have suffered. They have really suffered, and life goes on. And so I wanted to talk about that. But how do I weave in the story of relationships here, of our history, and particularly for the Indo-Fijians who remember 87, and some of the things that I remember that I talk about in the play was stuff that I saw myself, like Indians being herded into big trucks in Suva when the riots happened.
You only need to hear like my grandparents, they always they had like a very traumatic story about like how they were treated during that times. Like they would get like raided at nights and stuff, and it just wasn't safe to go out anymore. Like I remember my grandmother always used to tell me the story, my maternal grandmother from my mom's side. They used to live, I think, in Latoka at the time, I'm not sure. But they used to like go to a particular river to wash their clothes and stuff. And she said that eventually she heard like various people coming, and she knew that it was like lynchers or something like that. And they had to like hide out underneath the waters just long enough so they could watch the crowd go past, and they had to hold their breath just long enough, and they were like, they almost drowned. And it's like they had to do those kinds of things, otherwise they would have, you either do that or you suffer or even worse experience. What about you, Mason? What do you think?
I've heard many different perspectives from what happened in 1987. I've heard it from some of the top leaders in the country on their perspective on what happened. I've heard it from taxi drivers on their experience, and just from hearing it, I was not nearly born at the time, but just hearing what happened, like you said, being herded into carriers, being thrown at, being cussed at, just walking down the street and getting punched. These are things that you never want to happen to somebody. But it was in a time where the divide between the Itauke and the Indo-Fijians was very far. Like we were very far apart. And you look at it from where we are now and how close we've come, and you can appreciate that we've come so far, and then that these things what I mean to say is that they'll never happen again. And because I think we are more closer now as a nation and as people. But just hearing the stories, it kind of makes you
wonder.
Like you appreciate that you have people that were strong enough in that time to have come through it and to tell their story, and just to let us know that they've been through these things. And it's kind of I've always appreciated different stories, to hear different sides, different perspectives from different levels, and it's always just amazing to think that we've come this far.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to hear you two's points of view. So I think there's still a lot that needs to be done. I'm not sure about coming closer together, and not won't happen again. We said that in '87. And we had 2000. We said 2000. We had 2006. So we really can't say it won't happen again because we don't know.
We don't
know.
But what is important is the leadership at the highest level needs to be completely committed to say, okay, what can we do? And so to come back to the accident is about remembering the past. And sometimes remembering the past or going back to the past, it doesn't really help us. But the memories are there, and like you were saying, Zoyal, it's these memories which have not really healed. People have not been really healed properly, and the trauma is still there. It takes something, and it triggers. And we've had a reminder of that over the past several years. In 2000, I did a documentary of the 2000 coup, and I traveled around the country, talking to people. And you hear the stories of a woman whose house was burnt. And you say, okay, it's so easy to say, these Tauke people, they're really bad, and they will say, these Indians are doing this, and so there's a lot of blaming. And that comes from a complete lack of education in the sense of understanding each other. And because the system keeps us apart. And the one thing I say in the play is, we need Salote and Rahul talk about, Salote brings it up, talking about learning each other's language. And that's a start. When you begin to learn a language, it begins to make connections, because there's an appreciation of the other's culture, and it's that effort has to happen. If in primary school, when kids come, if you're Indo-Fijian, you learned Fijian. If you're Itoke, you learned. But really, it's learning each other's language is really good. When you say for a country like Norway, you go to Norway, everybody speaks English. Everybody speaks English very fluently. And so as Salote says, and Rahul says, you can't force them. He said, then same way we can't, say about maths and English. We have to force them to do maths and English. So we tell them to also learn these languages. So the play, it doesn't preach. Basically, it just tells you this is what's happened. You take what you want from the play. Ultimately, it's about the memory of what Salote's father did, Ratupeni. It's also a story about Sharmila and her experience of she's now emigrating, and this is why she's emigrating, but she still have a strong attachment and love for Fiji, but she just has to get away because she has that fear, like you were talking about Zoyal. It's still there because of what happened to her and her husband during '87. But everybody suffered. Of course, the Indo-Fijians, got the brunt of it, but other people who lost their jobs, who got sick, children suffered. So when we talk about truth and reconciliation, we have to go all the way back to '87. And we have to mean what we say and our actions. We can't just say, let's do it for the sake of doing it to appease people who say, let's do it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think coming from someone like you who has traveled the world, experienced different cultures and stuff like that, it's really important that how do I put this? The scholars of our country tell these stories so that it brings them to the forefront. Because I feel like most people are kind of uncomfortable to tell those kinds of stories because it may put their race in a bad light. Like Mason could say, okay, I want to write that play, but it makes the Fijians look kind of bad, doesn't it? But he can put his unique perspective there, and he's like, well, no, because we were put in that kind of situation. We were kind of like, there wasn't really that much, and we were kind of,
But you have to be honest. Huh?
Yeah, you have to be.
I mean, really, for me, the role of an artist is being honest.
Yeah.
And being unafraid to say what you want to say.
Yeah.
But that comes from an understanding of your culture, of your society.
Yeah.
So for me, the question has been, how can you say that, that could be offensive? I said, no, it's not offensive. It's just being honest. You have to understand that you can say these things honestly without being offensive.
Yeah.
And if the person is offended, then he or she has a problem.
Yeah.
They have to look at themselves and ask themselves, why am I offended about this? Because then obviously it says something. So being honest is really important.
That brings a lot of light to the contemplation that I was having the other day of the script that I was going to do for my mini documentary. It was about the rivalry between Grandma and Marist, and how it's a long-standing rivalry. And everyone asks why does these two high schools in Suva have this rivalry? And then I was looking through, just talking to some old boys and some older parents, and just going through the history of the school. And then what I picked up was that the rivalry comes from ethnic tensions. Because Marist Brothers at the start was it Marist Brothers Indian School?
No.
Marist Brothers Indian School.
Well, it did when it started, Indian students.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that's your take on it. It's not my take on it, but it's yes.
Because when I read the news articles on the protests done by the government and all this, I think I was scared to look into it and to what if it was true that it does strive from ethnic tensions, and then I'm bringing something up that is almost hate. Grandma hated Marist because of this. These guys hated each other, and it stemmed from that. And I wanted to go research into it, and I was kind of scared to actually go into it.
It's interesting that you say that, Mason. I think it's a masculine thing.
Yeah.
It's you talk about masculinity.
Yeah.
Because it's just the guys.
Yeah.
It's just the guys.
Yeah.
And yes, this is where research is really important. So if you're wanting to write something about this, then you need to research
about it.
And go back to newspaper articles that talk to people who are in Grammar or in Marist when this happened. And so for me, I think it was just a rivalry. It was a rivalry. It was a masculine thing. I'm stronger than you. I'm tougher than you. Because it's when you leave school, then and you find actually they meet and then they're good friends.
They're good friends. That's very true.
But this is it. Or Grammar girls marry Marist boys. And Marist boys marry Grammar girls. And similarly with St. Joseph's and ACS and all of these schools. There's just something there. There's just that rivalry that's always there, that's never really healed. And I think it's just a masculinity thing that testosterones.
but going back to what you said about telling the truth, I think that's something, being honest, being honest about it. Because if you try and change something and then you do put it into your artwork, it's not really
not authentic.
It's not authentic.
No,
doesn't show the full. Doesn't show it fully.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So I think that is one important point that I'll take from today, is just showing the full
Excellent.
honesty in your work.
Yeah.
I think having those kinds of insights is really, really important. Like having these conversations, like someone who was there at the time, when it probably started, and someone who's just new looking into it, and it's well, no, actually, this is what actually happened, and this is from my experience, from my time there. Okay, so I briefly touched on you being very well traveled, going around the world, sharing and spreading your art. You did spend a bit of time in Los Angeles, if I'm not wrong, at an artist residence where you actually ended up directing a play. Would you like to talk about that a bit?
Sure, happily. So I had these very, very dear friends of mine who are still very dear and very close friends of mine who live in LA. And they were working here at USP. They were on attachment. and they came to see one of my plays here at the Playhouse, and they loved the play.
Yeah.
They didn't know me, but they just saw the play, and they were both lecturers. Well, one was a lecturer, one was working, was the head of the library services, and but involved in administration.
Yeah.
And so they loved the play, and because they came to Fiji for the first time, they learned something about Fiji from watching the play.
Yeah.
It's like, the accent, you learn something. And so they said, we knew nothing about Fiji, but when we came, we learned something about Fiji. Yeah. And for me, this is what theatre should be doing. And so it was not only, but they almost left that I got to meet them. And they said they really liked the play, and I happened to be not long after that going to Europe and not even stopping. I was just going to transit in LA, and they said, anyway, you should come to LA. And one thing led to another. A couple of months later, I got a call from them and saying, how would you feel coming in to be artist in residence? And of course I said, no, this is LA, it's Hollywood there, and I was completely intimidated. But they were so encouraging, and they made it happen.
Yeah.
They made it happen that I eventually got to LA and was an artist in residence.
Yeah.
And one of the purposes was to direct my play.
Yeah.
So I directed a play called Men, Women and Insanity. It's about young people sitting around the back of a factory drinking. And as they drank, the more things came out, so things they were holding back came out, and was also looking at issues of gender, gender violence, looking at sexuality, looking at religion, that people just want to talk about, young people have an opinion of, maybe not as informed, but they just had an opinion, and these are important.
Yeah.
And so I performed the play there, had auditions, and it was a huge success. It was a huge success. And for me, it was so satisfying because it also gave me the confidence that my play could translate outside of this country.
Yeah.
And people who viewed it there also enjoyed it. And it was very affirming.
Yeah.
And so from the same collection of plays, I had another play called Yours Dearly. And a Palestinian friend of mine really liked the play. And I was at a writer's workshop in the US some years ago, a number of years ago. And he read the play, he liked the play. And unbeknownst to me, he gave it to a director, a Palestinian theatre director, who then translated the play into Arabic.
Wow.
And it only has two people in the play, a husband and a wife, who've been married for a very long time.
Yeah.
And so the play was performed in the West Bank by the Palestinian Workers' Union.
Oh my God.
And so for me, that's really meaningful to have a play translated into Arabic and performed in Jerusalem, in the West Bank. So those two experiences for me were very distinctive.
You say you write plays, of course. What type of mindset do you put yourself in to start writing a play from scratch? What do you do to put yourself in that mindset?
Well, I think you need inspiration. It's motivation, of course, to do it, but it's the inspiration. What inspires you. And because I'd been writing, I'm always inspired. I take notes a lot. I see things, I talk to people, situations, stories, and I take lots of notes. Whether they lead to anything, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes, often I draw from those notes from people. People say something, I write that down. And so, but it builds. It takes time. And so the accident evolved before I began writing was already 3 or 4 years of taking notes before I actually began writing.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's spontaneous. I just start writing, but that's rare. Particularly when you're working full time, finding the time in between.
Does it get easier after you write? You've written play after play. Does it get easier? No.
I've been writing for a very long time, many years, and it's never easy. It's easy the idea is easy. I hope they develop a technology where this machine can read your brain and write the story, because what's in my head is brilliant. When it comes to writing it, it's not so brilliant.
I think ChatGPT is going to get there soon.
There you go. I'm afraid of that. I do not want to go there because it'll make me very lazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're just rounding off. So I think we can use this time to talk about some of your favorite pieces of art from other artists from the country. Do you want to talk about some of the interesting people that are young or maybe up and coming artists that you'd like to highlight? And maybe at the end, you could just like talk about some of the projects that you're doing, that you're working on, that you'd like to, let everyone know as well.
Yeah. So as you mentioned earlier, I'm at the Oceania Centre. I'm the acting director at the Oceania Centre for Arts and Culture. And, post-COVID, we had to revive the place.
Yeah.
And there is so much potential at the Oceania Centre. And we're slowly, trying to realize the potential, particularly with artists, working with visual artists. So we have a gallery, the Gallery of Oceanian Art.
Yeah.
Every month we have a new exhibition. Currently there's an exhibition, a photographic exhibition by Jason Chute.
Yeah.
And then in April we have a new exhibition by Josiah McNamara. And it continues. The gallery is completely booked out until the end of the year in December. So every month, in fact, I think I should send you a notice so that you can tell your listeners that there is a gallery there. We're trying to develop a couple of workshops. One is with looking at film language, an appreciation of film and the processes and understanding film language. And that's going to happen in a few months' time.
Yeah.
We have some collaborations with people from overseas, artists. I just got an email of 4 Aboriginal artists wanting to come to do a residency,
oh my God.
Which is exciting. It's always very good for visiting artists to meet local artists.
Yeah.
Last year we had an amazing workshop with the professor of visual arts from Bergen University. So there's a lot of collaborations, exchanges happening.
Yeah.
In the performance, we have Pasifika Voices, we have Oceania Dance. We have to build on that, and getting the universities to support us is vital, and slowly getting there. So the Oceania Centre is an amazing place because it has the potential to do so much, both visually, performance also, but workshops in trying to encourage young people. Music is another thing. We want to also work on music. We have a recording studio, maybe record an album for young artists. I'm always very interested in musicians who are not mainstream, because
I actually know one of them.
It's so, but because non-mainstream musicians, and one great musician and composer is Silas Atora, who also, grew from the Oceania Centre many years ago. And Silas's music is very deep and not mainstream. But he tells stories, His is like world music. It's like world music. It straddles, the barriers or the borders rather of the world. And so these musicians interest me. Because they don't get the exposure that they would normally get from mainstream music. And same thing with dance, contemporary dance.
Like if you do workshops, like everyone here at Radio Pacific, of course, is like everyone loves art here. Like everyone loves it. The guy that was actually helping us set up the audio, he's actually a musician. Francisco Paguan. He does like a lot of blues and jazz stuff. He's gonna watch this. He's gonna be like, "You know me. That's not blues and jazz. Something else."
But just before we end, because we're coming to the end of our recording time, what is one message you'd like to give out to the young artists coming up and coming artists?
Oh gosh, I always hate it when people ask me what message. I really don't have a message, honestly, Mason. There are many messages, and it's not. To say this is my message won't hold true. I think for me is
just make art.
Is what inspires you.
What inspires you?
What inspires you. Look at yourself, both of you. So of course you're in computing. So I'm going to sort of move you aside because that's different. But Mason, you're interested in writing. So if you want to be a writer, a serious writer, and if you really want to do that, then you can do it. But it's not easy. You just don't switch it on or turn it off. It's on all the time. But what keeps it going? What sustains your interest? What sustains your passion? Is by reading. You have to read, whether it's online or whether it's in book form. You have to keep learning. Because once you keep learning, then you're informed. And that's what inspires you. But nature, for me, nature always inspires me.
Thank you, Mr. Larry Thomas, for being on our show today.
Pleasure.
Sorry we couldn't have more time with you.
It's okay.
But we learned a lot today. I think our viewers are going to learn a lot when they watch the podcast. So thank you for tuning in to the Island Time podcast. This is Mason Zoyal, and we'd like to thank again Mr. Larry Thomas for joining us. Vinaka.
Vinaka.
Naka.